Hi, everyone. I'm Adriana Diaz. Thank you for joining us. President Trump is continuing to defend his interactions with the new leader of Ukraine. According to multiple reports, President Trump in July asked the Ukrainian president several times to investigate Joe Biden's son over his business dealings in the country. The former vice president is now calling on the president to release a full transcript of that phone call. Speaking to Reporter Sunday, President Trump said he did nothing wrong.
We had a great conversation. We had a conversation on many things. In fact, I believe Ukraine put out a statement yesterday saying that we covered many different topics. It was a warm and friendly conversation. I said absolutely nothing wrong. It was perfect.
It was perfect, he said. CBS News' Hillary Lane has more on the controversy and the reaction from the Democratic presidential candidates.
Democratic presidential candidates turned out to flip stakes and win votes at the annual steak fry in Des Moines, Iowa. In a still crowded field, some took aim at President Trump over the controversy in a whistleblower case over his reported phone conversation with the Ukrainian president.
An act against the people of the United States to collaborate or attempt to collaborate with a foreign leader.
He believes he is above the law.
In an interview Friday, Ukraine's foreign minister denied suggestions President Trump put pressure on the nation's leader. Former Vice President Joe Biden addressed reports President Trump pressed Ukraine's president to investigate his son, Hunter Biden.
Trump deserves to be investigated. Why is he on the phone with a foreign leader, trying to intimidate a foreign leader, if that's what happened?
Hunter Biden worked for a Ukrainian gas company during the Obama administration. President Trump tweeted Saturday, "The fake news media and their partner, the Democrat Party, want to stay as far away as possible from the Joe Biden demand that the Ukrainian government fire a prosecutor who is investigating his son, or they won't get a very large amount of U.S. money. So they fabricate a story about me and a perfectly fine and routine conversation I had with the new president of the Ukraine. Nothing was said that was in any way wrong." The Biden campaign Saturday issued a statement calling the president's side of the story a conspiracy theory. Hillary Lane, CBS News, New York.
Ben Domenech is the publisher of The Federalist and the host of The Fray on Sirius XM, which debuts this week.
Yes.
Congratulations about that.
You.
Ben, thank you for being here. So there is so much focus on this whistleblower report that is alleging that the president made inappropriate remarks, put inappropriate pressure on Ukraine's new president to dig into whether Joe Biden's son, his dealings in Ukraine, and whether the vice president at the time tried to influence the government there. Do you think we will ever see this report? The administration has refused to release it or even give the details of what's in it.
You know, you don't typically see these kinds of conversations ever released. There's not really, a situation here where you could look to precedent involving the release of the conversations between two global leaders in a way that would reflect on very badly on the administration if they did that, especially based on a domestic political concern. At the same time, I think many of the president's allies, along with former Secretary of State John Kerry, have called for him to do that, either privately behind the scenes, and I think more will do it publicly because they want this clarified, and they have this report out here from a whistleblower, obviously raising these concerns. A thing to keep in mind here is that it's possible for there to be problems related to Vice President Biden's son in terms of his dealings overseas. He has some connections in Ukraine and in China, which have raised a lot of concerns that have been publicized in the media at the New York Times, the New Yorker, and others. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Joe Biden himself did anything wrong. And so in this circumstance, President Trump is trying to create a situation where one of his chief rivals in 2020 is someone who's going to have to answer and talk to questions about corruption, as opposed to talking to people about the economy, about health care, or about anything else that's going to have a more direct effect on how they vote.
To distract voters.
Exactly. The same way that he used the Clinton Foundation to do so when it came to Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Now, even though we haven't seen this report, the details of the allegations are coming out, what was considered inappropriate. Yet Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal attorney, is digging his heels, saying that the president did nothing wrong, that it was totally legitimate to talk to another foreign leader about these issues. What is his defense?
Well, I think his defense would be, that corruption is something that we have long, worked against in Ukraine. It's been a problem there in many different circumstances, and he would probably just lump it in with all of that. But then that's just, I mean, there are partisan arguments on both sides of that. Again, I think that the overall situation here is one that the president probably kind of likes, in the sense that it allows him to bash the media, say that they're lying about him. It allows him to force Joe Biden into a position where he's defending himself on something that people don't really understand. It's kind of a vague and complicated issue for them. And it kind of pushes him off the game that he's had as the front runner over the past several months of being the guy that could really lean into the president and reassert some kind of normalcy. It's a way to try to turn him into another person who's viewed as elite, corrupt, out of touch, et cetera, the same type of thing that he did in 2016.
Put Joe Biden on the defensive.
Exactly.
Speaking of Joe Biden on the ropes, Elizabeth Warren came out ahead of him in a new Des Moines Register poll. She had 22% of support from Iowa Democrats. Joe Biden, I think, had 20, which is statistically insignificant. But what is the significance of this?
The actual most significant element in this poll, from my perspective, is not that Warren is in the lead, but that Bernie Sanders has collapsed, that he's down to 11% now, and that clearly his voters are migrating to her. It's got to be frustrating for the Sanders campaign. They actually just lost one of their leading staffers in Iowa. They've had some turnover and some internal problems. And I think the real story of this is that this is setting up to be a Biden-Warren fight that will pit sort of a return to normalcy, nostalgia for the Obama years, against someone who basically says that an economic populist message is the correct one, but that she wants to deliver on it in very different ways than what the president has done since taking office.
What do you think it is that is causing former Sanders supporters to now gravitate toward Warren? Because last time around, Bernie had a lot of support.
You know, I think part of it is that people feel like he's a little bit of old news. I also think that when it comes to Elizabeth Warren, she's shown the tenacity and the confrontational elements when it comes to Donald Trump that a lot of voters are responding to. The real question is going to be, you know, is she able to cut through the support that Joe Biden has, particularly in a state like South Carolina? He has a lot of well-wishing support from communities that backed the president, that made up, you know, the Obama coalition in a way. If he's able to hold on to that, then he could see a situation where he locks this down very quickly. But if that starts to chip away, and we've seen a little bit of that happening with Warren, then that could actually take on a new personality, in the sense that people could say, look, we've known Joe Biden for a long time. He's run a number of times before. There's a reason he hasn't been our nominee. We'd like to go with someone who has the physical strength to be able to stand out there on a rope line for 4 hours taking pictures with people. And we believe that she represents more the direction of where we'd like the party to go.
But for the base of Democrats, really, electability is still the key. And that's their priority. Who can beat President Trump, right,
Yes.
for Democrats? Elizabeth Warren hasn't always been seen in that light because she is so progressive. She is so much further to the left than Joe Biden.
Yes.
So where does she stand on electability, and will that, do you think, supersede all else?
So back in 2004, we saw this argument play out in a similar way. You know, a Northeastern progressive and Howard Dean, who excited people, who got a lot of, early juice going. But then there was this conversation about electability that played it out, and over the course of just a couple of weeks, John Kerry locked up the nomination. You could see something similar happen here. But if it does, it's going to be something that I think is going to require a lot of argumentation among Democrats about whether this electability thing is really something they're confident in about Joe Biden, whether they think that that's something that they can have confidence that he'll be able to do, not just 6 months from now, but in next November. Will he have the ability to go through the grind of a horribly taxing presidential campaign and still be able to deliver the goods in debates against Donald Trump?
Let's talk about Cory Booker. His
Yes.
campaign released what sounds like a Hail Mary. They basically asked for a certain amount of money in donations, and without that, they'd have to pull out of the race. What do you make of that? Is he done?
I think that Cory Booker is headed towards being done. It's really surprising the number of senators who haven't been able to connect this cycle. I mean, you see that ever since she called herself a top-tier candidate, Kamala Harris has been trending downward. Kristen Gillibrand obviously was kind of embarrassing the way that things played out for her. And I think Cory Booker could be next, which would be pretty surprising for someone who a lot of people view as young, talented, and in many ways the future of the Democratic coalition. To me, I'm a little surprised by it, but I also think it says people want more of an aggressive approach to policy, and that's what Elizabeth Warren is giving them right now.
All right. Well, Ben Domenech, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.